that means it's time for another edition of the BlueWhite Tailgate Podcast. Frank Bonanni of the York Daily Record, Mike Gross of the Gross Rational Product, and Andrew Callista here to take you through. Guys, it's a big show. First episode of Season 2. Our Season 2 premiere, we took 2 weeks off, and as we are in the off season of Penn State football, we kick off our second season here on the BlueWhite Tailgate Podcast. Folks, if you're watching on YouTube, if Frank and Mike seemed a little bit perturbed, it is because of a discussion just before coming on here, and we're going to get into this a little bit more about the top Penn State running backs of all time, and I let them in on a little secret. I do not have one fan favorite and all-time great in my top 5, so stay tuned for that. We're going to talk a little bit about a linebacker that Penn State pulls out of the transfer portal, preseason rankings, and also best backfields in the Big Ten. Guys, we are going to start, if it's okay with you gentlemen, with the preseason way too early rankings for the 2025 football season. Where's Penn State? Do you guys have them in the top 5? Everybody across the country seems to have them in the top 10, some as high as number 1. What do you guys think?
I would have them no. Well, first of all, let me make a little comment about the media here. I love how people do these things like way too early. Here's my way too early prediction. Like they're putting a caveat at the front saying, "I know this is ridiculous, but I saw this morning on ESPN. The best example of this in the world is the NFL's schedule reveal." And I saw on ESPN this morning, let's do 10 overreactions to the NFL schedule reveal. Please. Anyway, I will have Penn State. I'm going to have Penn State, I think, number 2 as of right now. Texas, Penn State, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson would be my top 5.
That's a pretty good deal. I think Penn State, you can make an argument in May for 1, number 2, number 3. I just think they have to be in the top 5 because if you're going to do a preseason ranking, you're looking at, well, how did they end last year? What are they bringing back? How does that kind of fit in your mind before they play a game? And if you look at those things, Penn State's got to be among the top 5. Whether you think James Franklin can win a big game, whether you think anything else, I think at this point they got to be. So I think you can make an argument for any of them. I like Penn State. Yeah, I think Texas, I would probably maybe go with Texas as number 1 as well, because I like how aggressive they were in the transfer portal at getting position, like filling position of need. And I think they have, unless we're selling too high on Arch Manning and the quarterback situation, because the one thing Penn State has, they have a returning quarterback. And how many teams that we are...
Some of these other top 5 or 6 do not have that.
They do not. Yeah. None of the big ones don't. So how much do we gauge that? So there you go.
I agree. I
think in August, when these polls really come out, when the AP poll comes out and the coaches poll out, I think Texas is going to be number 1. And I think the teams that we've named, the 3 or 4 teams that we named, are going to follow them in some order. I think it's going to be very similar to what it is now. I'm sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to go off your point about the media, about how it's the overreaction and it's the way too early. But yet these are going to be the same people that are putting together the actual polls. And I always like to see how they vote in the original AP poll compared to what they say. Here's our post-spring practice, what we've learned. Here's our early season 2025 rankings. I do agree with you, Mike, that I think Texas is going to be the number 1 in the AP poll based on brand recognition, how that game kind of ended against Ohio State, with them driving, Arch Manning, all the hype around him, all the NIL money around him, the family name. My top 5, I'm actually going with Georgia, Penn State, Clemson, Texas, and Ohio State at number 5. And the reason I don't put Penn State number 1, I so want to put Penn State number 1. Earlier in season 1 on this program, after the Jim Knowles hire, I said there was no excuses for Penn State not to win a national championship in 3 years. Year 1 might be their best opportunity with talent to do that. So I want to put Penn State number 1. To Frank's point, it's hard for me to see them getting over the hurdle of the Drew Aller interception, the not being able to do it in the quote-unquote big game. James Franklin coming up short. I don't think that's all James Franklin's fault. I don't. But I think until you do it, I have trouble putting Penn State number 1, but I have Penn State number 2 going into next year. And I really don't see a reason why they shouldn't be undefeated in the regular season. I really don't see a reason that they should have a loss.
Of the teams that we have not mentioned, I think there are a couple that maybe could be in there, and it really based on if they find a quarterback, and that's Notre Dame and Oregon. Mm. I think those two have to find a quarterback, and they have highly regarded guys, and they look like they have a lot of everything else.
Right. I think part of what we're looking at is that some people will penalize Penn State for Drew Aller, and some people obviously will reward them for Drew Aller when it comes to these things, because I think there's the basis that there's a group of people that will say, Drew didn't get it done. Here's his flaws, but he has this potential to take that step. We believe in our minds he's close and can do it. And I think the only issue with some of these other teams is no matter how highly rated the prospects are, because there's some people saying, oh, the Notre Dame's quarterback, Ohio State's quarterback, they're so highly rated, they're just going to come in and make it work. Well, probably to an extent, but until they do it, I mean, you don't know that. I mean, we kind of know where Drew's at, and we know his potential because of his physicality and the way he progressed in certain areas. So I think Penn State's got an edge there that at least we know. Like, you have Georgia number 1, so who's their quarterback? Is he going to be good?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think with them, I think they're the one of this group that I think there's the most doubt about the quarterback position. And I didn't love their quarterback last year, frankly, but he's out the door. So I don't know. I don't know if they're better than they were last year. And I thought last year was their as weird as it sounds, I thought that was their worst team in a few years. But anyway.
Well, I'm putting a lot of stock in Gunnar Stockton on that, and just like the attitude and the brand of Georgia football and the way they like to play. And maybe I'm putting too much stock into the Georgia Tech game, but to me, they had no business winning that game. They had no business with a backup quarterback for most of the year, who's now going to be their starter. So I know it's kind of a little bit contradictory against Notre Dame being in that game. Like, Notre Dame played for the national championship, didn't really push Ohio State, but at least gave them a scare some point in that game. And to me, Georgia should have been blown off the field with losing their quarterback and the way things were going, and they weren't. So there's a lot, and I think Kirby Smart could manage it. And literally what I think Penn State's going to do, turn around, hand the ball off, and just hog molly everybody with 6 tough guys in the box on the offensive line and tight end and push people around. So that's my thinking on Georgia. It's also my thinking on Penn State a lot, and that if Drew Aller does, push the ball down the field and Andy Kotelnicki does his thing, is why I think Penn State, should win the national championship. But, I'm also putting a lot of stock in Clemson with Cade Klubnik, because he's one of those guys that had all the talent in the world, highly rated. The article is this Clemson's guy? And then they went out, and I remember when ESPN ran that article, they ended up losing. I think it was the Boston College, and it was like, obviously, okay, this is not the guy, but now here he is with all this experience. And Clemson showed a lot, I thought, in the game against Texas last year in the college football playoff.
Yeah, they definitely peaked at the end of the year. There's no doubt about that. And they pull off that upset in the ACC championship game. That was significant. But what Frank said about how the way the quarterbacks are perceived, 2 points come to mind about that. Number one, I think with Texas, this might be a little bit of a crazy reach, but I think most people perceive Arch Manning to be an upgrade, even though Ewers was a pretty good player. I think the broad general perception is that Manning might be an upgrade. And the other thing is, if we'd have been talking this a year ago at this time, we wouldn't have known about Will Howard. I mean, Ohio State was in this situation quarterback wise a year ago, and they won the Natty.
Yeah, they did lose a lot. Like, they have a lot to refill.
And
they're refilling it with the best talent in football, arguably. But here's the thing: Penn State, for the first time, the way it feels, doesn't have that to refill.
Yeah, I think Ohio State is being a teeny bit oversold, but again, let's not go nuts because it's May.
And I like the way Penn State's schedule, for the most part, shapes up when we're talking in May compared to other teams. The spacing of the schedule, I think, works pretty well for a team that could always use a little bit of time in the beginning of the season for some adjustments to get fully rolling with new coaches and, a defense that has to find some parts and to really get Drew Aller going with new receivers. I really think that it sets up well, and that your first big game comes at home after a bye week against a team that should be really good by the middle of the end of the year, but may not be where you think Oregon should be in September, 3,000 miles away from home, probably at night. So,
yeah, that's a really good point. Penn State,
I think that'll help their confidence. I mean, I think they know what they can do in their minds in a way, but I think you need that kind of confidence when you're that type of team to help propel you to what's going to be tougher coming up.
It's almost like it almost feels like an NFL team's exhibition season. Yeah, they have 3 games that they should be cruise, and then a week off, and then it gets serious.
Right. I think the toughest thing might be going to the way the schedule goes. The challenge they may have is going to Iowa.
That's a real
not just because it's Iowa, but because of where it's at and the timing on the schedule. Because they don't get a week off after the cross country road trip this year. They got to go to California, come back, play a game at home, and then go right back to Iowa. But will it be a night game? That'll be better for. I think Notre Dame's playing at night. That night, so maybe that saves Penn State from playing a night game in Kinnick Stadium. So.
Yeah, Frank is on top of this.
You are on top of it. He's also an eternal optimist. Penn State, Oregon. He said at night, big noon kick. Come on, man. Nothing says bigger college football than big noon kick.
Putting money on this? I'm putting money on this. If Penn State doesn't get this night game for a whiteout, they're never getting a night game they like for a whiteout. It's going to happen. They're not going to put Oregon playing a game at 9:00 body time in the morning. They're not going to do that to Oregon.
Forget schools. Fly them out on Wednesday. Big noon kick is what college football is all about. What university is actually, I just saw a university is trying to change one of these selections. There's like a protest going on right now, and it doesn't involve Penn State.
Right. Ohio State's pissed.
Yeah, that's right. Ohio State and Texas. That's what it was. I totally forgot. That was the other. I just drew a mind blank. Yeah.
An Ohio State legislator is trying to put a bill through to limit noon games. If you can believe this.
Okay. I'll see what I can do in the Penn State, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Pull some wheels in motion. Big guy. Wheels in motion.
We'll make some calls.
Frank, have you looked at this whole thing with the TV partners? Who gets the right to what week this year? Have you started to look at that yet? I haven't.
No.
Apropos to that. Okay.
No, I have not. I mean, it's really their only chance. I mean, because the rest of Penn State's home schedule is really nothing to speak of. After they play Oregon, I mean, before Oregon and after Oregon, the best home game is Indiana for fans.
Indiana is the best.
October 18th, Penn State, Iowa, USC, Notre Dame. So
that's at night.
That game's going to be on NBC. So we know that. So that would lead me to believe. Yeah. I mean,
What would it lead you to believe? What would it lead you to believe?
I think it has to be locked in as a big noon kick.
Well, or ABC could take it at 3:30, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
CBS.
A lot of that's why I asked Frank if he's looked at this stuff yet, because there's a lot of things that factor in. There's multiple TV partners, and they have this lottery for which weeks they control. Or
well, for Iowa, like, who cares if it's, to me, it's like, is it a night game or is it not? And to me, the timing otherwise doesn't matter. To me, that's a different game out there if it's at night than if it's at 12 or 3 or whatever. So I think if you avoid night, that's probably better.
Noon is a game changer. Obviously, I think the last time when Clifford went out there and it was the top 5 matchup and he got hurt, I mean, that was a 3:30 kick that day. So, or a 4 o'clock kick.
If I'm remembering correctly, that feels like it was a 3:30. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on. Guys, we talked about this in our last episode coming out of the Blue-White game. James Franklin made the plea. He made the plea that he needed a linebacker. And very rarely, the last time I remember him doing this was like his first year coaching or in 2016, third year at Penn State, when he looked up at all the recruits in the media room and he kept saying recruiting, and things like that. That's the last time I kind of remember like an open plea from James Franklin at a microphone. It happens. They go out, they get the top-rated linebacker in Campbell from UNC, Amari Campbell, who leaves Bill Belichick. Maybe he just wasn't all up on the Jordan Hudson drama or whatever going on down there. But Penn State gets it done. Mike, you had a perfectly titled column on the Substack.
Oh, about them identifying the mic. Yeah.
Identified
the mic. Yeah. I think this guy is a middle linebacker. I'm not sure that anybody else on their roster really is. Maybe Specca, and I think that's not a completely meaningless distinction. I think that's important. And, I've looked at this guy a little bit on tape, and he's really good at the downhill, make the tackle kind of thing. He's very good at that. He played 2 years. He played both years at North Carolina, so he's got a couple years left. It seems like a really good acquisition. We'll see. We don't know. We'll see. But he looks like we were looking for a middle linebacker, and I think James Franklin found it.
Yeah, it's a good deal. I mean, they had Mohamed Toure, who's the older brother of Vabu for Penn State too. But, that's a guy who I guess maybe you don't know what kind of NIL money he's looking for with 1 year to play, because Campbell has 2 and he had coming off knee surgery. So maybe you got the best, possible, truly. And I think that's a big get, considering by the end of the spring transfer portal, I don't really know how much Penn State related talent was left to be had. There was a lot of guys still in the portal, but as far as people that would fit them, I think they got about what they could. They think they maybe did the best they could, when you're thinking that they got Pena, the wide receiver, and Campbell, the linebacker, all at the end. And obviously they could have used a D tackle and a safety, but I don't think that those positions were there for them at that point. So I think another reason why they upgraded and had the best offseason in college football.
I don't think there's many. I don't think there were a ton of guys. Maybe what was sort of anticipated is with this spring thing is that guys will go through spring practice, see the handwriting on the wall, and get out of their situation. Well, there doesn't seem to have been as much of that as maybe people suspected, and certainly not as much of that among guys who were at the level where they could help Penn State.
Frank, and Mike, you just mentioned it too, about the guys at Penn State's level to be able to come in and contribute and not just be a role player, practice squad player. What are we reaching the point in the transfer portal, at least they have for basketball in one coach's mind, where a basketball coach kind of spoke out and goes, everybody in the portal, it's trash. So, Mike, did you see that? So have we?
Who said that?
It was an unnamed coach. It was an unnamed coach, but saying, yeah, there's all these guys in the transfer portal and they're all trash. So I'm saying after so many years of having it, what is it, like year 7 of having the transfer portal, maybe year 6? It's hard to keep up with the timelines with all the changes. But are we reached a point of saturation where it's pretty much, well, I'm not good enough to play here. It's pretty much everybody that would just be going down a level to play in the transfer portal for the most part. I know there's some gems now.
I understand the point. I think basketball is a little different than football, but to me in basketball, the really good example of this, and I'm not going to remember the guy's name, but the guy that transferred to Penn State from Bucknell, the shooter.
Oh.
And you know what I mean? And they ended up on the team that went to the second round of the tournament a couple years ago. That guy is a good example of how a good college team can get a little better in the portal. You go out and get a designated gunslinger, from a guy who proved to be pretty good at Bucknell. And now that's how it works. Football's a little different because it's multi-positional, but it's easy to get carried away with this stuff. Yeah.
Andrew Funk
for a reason. Yeah.
Andrew Funk was the sharpshooter from Bucknell.
That's it. Yeah, that's right. That's the guy.
And with Penn State, I mean, the fit is also not just talent and position, but it's also going to be Penn State is not going to probably give a guy $1 million to come play there, like some schools are willing to do. They're certainly not going to probably do that with recruits, meaning high school kids.
Yeah.
So, and then is it a fit? I mean, Penn State has at least from what you understand, a pretty serious vetting process about bringing guys in. And Franklin talks about that we got to preserve the locker room at all costs, as opposed to just bringing in a talent. So I think it even limits Penn State more because of what they're looking for beyond the talent. So that's why I think James Franklin is very comfortable with just picking a few pieces here and there that to them are almost sure gets. And that can mean a young guy or an older guy, but that's how they work. And I think as this plays out with NIL and everything else, I kind of would agree with it. Like Penn State is not going to be rolling over, losing 10 and 15 guys and bringing in 10 or 15 guys. And I think that's sound. Invest in what you've got, what you know, and what works.
Well, I would agree with that in general. I wonder if that hasn't changed a little bit given the urgency of this moment, this season.
Oh,
they figured out that this wide receiver from Syracuse was a good fit and a good cultural fit pretty quick. They figured out this linebacker from North Carolina was a good cultural fit pretty quick. So I mean, I think you have to understand that this is James Franklin shoving all his chips in the middle of the table.
Mike, I'm kind of in your boat with that, and I kind of made that case with, hey, this is semi-pro football, professional sports at this point. You have a chance to go out and get a guy. We're not worried about tough feelings. Practice harder, lift harder, play harder, and go out and get the guy.
Well, but on the other hand, you don't want to pain in the ass. You don't want who's going to be difficult, and I that's a real thing. I mean, I think Franklin is serious about that, but I just suspect that right now they're really dialed in on the next 6 months.
Job interviews in the professional sector, and you guys have all been through this, are a lot more thorough and probably longer the process than it comes to get a guy out of the transfer portal in college football. And yet there's a reason why there's 60-day probationary periods, because you don't know if that person's going to be a pain in the ass until you get them in the room, get them in the office, and things like that. So
there is, but you got to understand, like I mentioned with Texas went out and got, 4, 5 defensive tackles in the transfer portal. Penn State direly could use an experienced defensive tackle in the transfer portal. There's different philosophies going on. Penn State got no defensive tackles in the transfer portal. We did not even hear that they were seriously into one of the defensive tackles in the transfer portal. And Texas, it was trying to win a national title, went out and got, I don't know how many, but it was multiple defensive tackles because They lost guys, and they thought they needed them. So there are teams operating in different spheres in their belief in how they do things. I mean, that's the way that is. Oregon is operating in a different thought process when it comes to NIL money, clearly, than Penn State.
It's like a foreign policy debate.
But doesn't it? Yeah, it is. It's sort of like that. But it does seem like, whereas Penn State, I think, was kind of, when this NIL thing first hit the way it hit, I think Penn State was a little knocked backwards by it. And that is no longer the case. And they can, the way they want to do it, they have the resources to do it, apparently.
Right. No. Mike, there was no alignment back then. Now there's.
You can't have alignment, my friend. I've heard that before.
I can't believe you're saying Sandy Barber wasn't on top of it. Shocking.
God love her.
I remember where I was the day she was hired. I was walking around Lidditz at a art festival, and I
Coolest small town in America, my friend.
I know it. Who is this woman they are hiring to lead the athletic department? And now, how many years later, I'm still asking the same question.
I had a phone call from somebody in the Stanford athletic department saying this is the dumbest decision that Penn State has ever made.
Wow.
And she wasn't even at Stanford.
She was at Cal. So maybe there was a little bit of a rivalry there, but this is the dumbest decision Penn State could ever make. That was a phone call the day she was hired from somebody who works in the Stanford athletic department, who I happen to have a relationship with.
Well, I liked her. I thought she was an interesting person, and I just
yeah, I'd love to have coffee with her, but I don't think I want her running my Division 1A football.
Yeah, she wasn't in terms of the money and everything. She was.
Last word on NIL. Penn State has its philosophy and the way they're doing things. There's no reason that Penn State basketball should be last in NIL money in the Big Ten. You gotta do something. You're Penn State. It's not going to be a win now, pay later type of thing. You got to be able to compete. At least bring them up. Get somewhere middle of the pack. Give the basketball program a chance. That's my plug for the basketball program. Might as well say it. Build a practice arena. If you build it, they will come. Moving on to talk about the running backs. Before we get into this historical debate, Penn State running backs, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. We heard it all last year, best running back combo in the country. Don't know if that was necessarily true, but let's just keep it within the Big Ten right now. Is this the best backfield by far in the Big Ten? And I say that, I do believe so, and I think what makes them the most dominant and possibly a clear-cut number one in the country is because Penn State's offensive line is showing that they have a mean streak, that they can push people around, and I think that's key.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at the experience that these two guys bring. I mean, that's right there. They've been successful together and in certain ways have gotten better over 3 years. I mean, there's nobody, they both could break Penn State's all-time rushing record. So I know that you don't go on that alone, right? But saying that, just saying that I mean, come on, who has two guys like this? And I think there's another level for Nick to even reach. Having said all that, and he has a season to try to get there, as far as being an elusive, even better home run hitter. And I think Katron Allen morphed into a different human being running the football in the playoffs than he was. And I think that's really
true. Yeah.
That bodes really well that they both now, as long as they stay healthy. And of course, that's been an issue. It is for all running backs, but those guys were not healthy all last year. Now they finished strong, but if they could stay healthy, both of them, I think they're the best in the country coming back.
Well, if they're not the best in the country, they got to be close. And I think it's the fact that there's two of them. They really are 1A and 1B, which means they can keep each other fresh, and Penn State can absorb an injury to one of them. You don't want that, obviously. The two guys from Ohio State last year, Judkins and Henderson, who both went in the second round, like 2 picks apart, I think. Those are guys that you could at least make an argument about, and they were kind of similar because they were sharing the load last year. But now, I don't think there's anybody who can see it.
I think what makes them so tough to defend because, and we've talked to James Franklin, we talked to Bill O'Brien when he was like sharing the workload as Paterno kind of was a bell cow back, was about guys getting the feel for the game and how that work kind of divvies up. I think it goes both ways because, when you have a Nick Singleton, you're taking different angles as a defender than you are on Katron Allen. So it's just as hard for a defense to adjust to the style of running back that Penn State's putting back there. And I think that actually really bodes well for them. I think it bodes well for the durability that guys have to account for that. They have to change their attack on the defensive side of how they're going to go out and try to tackle these guys. And the one thing that I said for me, making them a number one is the elevation of the game. And Steve Jones alluded to it last year. And I think we paid a lot closer attention to it once Steve Jones brought it up, how Nick Singleton was catching the football. The ball wasn't catching him. He was attacking it with his hands and being smooth. I think I only remember, one drop. Obviously, there was the drop in the Orange Bowl, which I'm having trouble remembering if that was Nick or Katron in the end zone, but that was a low pass from Drew Aller. But he was so good last year, and I think that really is what makes the attack dynamic for how they could go about, attacking from the running back.
That's a clear area where Singleton improved, and he obviously worked on it. And this year it's going to be, add some wiggle to his game and make people miss with, ideally with spin moves and change of direction and shedding tackles, just making people miss. I think that's the final frontier for him. We'll see if he gets there. But
here's the other thing with those two guys is that rarely do you see players in the Big Ten operate as if they're performing on a different level. Like that the guys they're going up against are not like almost that they should be in the NFL right now. And you don't see that always. We saw that like with Allen Robinson, for example. He'd come into a game and it looked like he was playing high school kids sometimes. Okay, so I think that Katron Allen and Nick, along with their skills, they both run so physically hard, both of them, not just Katron. Nick, maybe sometimes his detriment, tries to plow over people as well because that's his style. Think about defenses this year. You deal with one of them trying to plow you over, and then 2 series later, the next guy who could be playing in the NFL right now comes at you the same way. What effect is that going to have on defenses going into the second half? And I think
those two plus the offensive line, it's going to wear on people. There's no
it should,
and it should even more so.
And when's the last time Penn State has had any similar function of this that we're speaking of? 2 running backs like this and an offensive line like this to be able to have a security. So where does that lead you, Andrew?
Well, that leads me into a perfect segue for this former TV reporter. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, they're not necessarily Ron Dane, Tiki Barber, Thunder and Lightning of the New York Giants for all our Giant fan listeners out there. But to Frank's point, Penn State has had a couple backfields where it was a 2-headed monster. And we promised at the top of the show we were going to get into a lively debate, and we we're going to talk the best Penn State running backs of all time and give our top 5. We might have some variations here. Gentlemen, before we came on, I kind of said something that was shocking to both of you. I'll hold that in suspense for a little bit longer. But the top 5 Penn State running backs of all time. Who wants to go first in this debate? Raise your hand.
I'll go first. Are we going 1 through 5, or are we just...
However you want to do it. It's your choice.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, this is probably not a scoop, but I'm going to say number 1 is Saquon Barkley. Number 2 is Larry Johnson. Number 3 is Keyjana Carter. Now, we're talking about the Big Ten era here.
I'm saying all time. It's
all time?
All time.
Oh, I thought we decided to.
Well, let's change it up. Let's do this one first. We'll do Big Ten era only.
Okay, and then I've got Curtis Enos and Nick Singleton. That's my 5.
That's a really good. If you're going Big Ten era, I have a hard time fighting. I didn't know if people would give Larry Johnson as much credit as I think he deserves, because if you really watched him, he was a better, maybe because he had to be, but he was a better all-around running back for Penn State than Kajana Carter because he was really a good receiver and they needed him to be at times. He was a very good blocker and he had enough speed to combine with his physicality. I thought he was number 2. Saquon Barkley's number 1. He played the greatest game, gave the greatest individual performance I've ever seen in college football, covering a team for 30 years when he went to Iowa in 2017 and was unbelievable. He's number 1. I'd agree with your top 5, actually, Mike. I would definitely have Larry number 2. I'm going to give number 3. I guess you could make a case for Curtis Enos because of how dominating he was, but I got to go with Kajana was just, I don't know.
I thought he was a tremendous college player.
He was. I only saw
other weapons around him and an unbelievable offensive line. There was a great mix there. Whereas Johnson dragged in the one really big year that he had. He dragged him. He carried him.
Right. I might give Curtis Enos. I only saw Kajana play 1 year in person, and every time he was running really fast and really well, but through gigantic holes where nobody was touching him. So Curtis Enos didn't have that luxury. So yeah, okay, maybe I'll move it. I'll change it up a little bit. Curtis Enos 3, Kajana 4, and sure, why not? Nick 5.
All right, that's the Big Ten era.
All right, Big Ten era for me. Larry Johnson, hands down number 1, and he's my number
over Space Squad.
And he's my number 2.
That's ridiculous. Go ahead.
And he's my number 2. My number 2 of all time. Saquon Barkley, Kajana Carter, Curtis Enos, and then Tony Hunt are my top 5.
Tony Hunt.
How do you say that Larry Johnson's better than Saquon Barkley at Penn State?
Here's why. Because in 2002, the year he rushed for 2,000 yards, he did a lot of it with a pulled quad and an injured hamstring. So when I had a lively debate at the last Rose Bowl, and it was with Corey Geiger, and I said Larry Johnson should have won the Heisman in 2002. And Corey and I were going back and forth.
Oh, you're not the only person who thought that. I mean,
right.
I had some readers who were giving me the old, well, if you're not voting for him for Heisman, you're not.
I mean, Banks was great from Iowa too. I'm not going to dispute that. But I thought Ken Dorsey was getting way too much, for career achievement award as a quarterback. So, well, what did Larry do? Started off slow, and I have his stats pulled up here because I anticipated this. And Frank, maybe I should have went first. Frank, you kind of stole my glory with Larry being a complete running back against Wisconsin. Right? A game Penn State had to win after the loss to Iowa in overtime. Larry Johnson only rushed for 14 times. He only rushed 14 times for 111 yards. He averaged 7.9 yards per carry. What that tells me, it wasn't a good offensively called game. Probably should have given the rock to number 5 just a tad more in that game, and wouldn't have to rely on Robbie Gouldsley. Also,
I knew what happened though. Andrew. In that game, he was injured. That's when his hamstring.
Well, he was injured.
Yeah, that was
yes,
part of it.
That was part of it. But that happened, I thought, later in the game in the third quarter. Did it not?
I can't remember if he came into that game and tried to play through it and was limited because of that, or if he actually injured it in that game. But that was an issue in that game. I
thought it was a third quarter thing. So if I'm wrong, maybe I'm mistaken. And I'll take back that whole thing.
It might have been that. He had over 100 receiving yards against Iowa, even though they lost. That was pretty incredible.
Yes. The stats I'm looking at say 93, 6 catches.
Oh, 93?
For 93. 18 carries for 68. But I would really got out to it early in that game and kind of loaded the box on him. Same thing against Michigan. Michigan, he was really hurt coming out of that Wisconsin game. And he toughed it out a week later. And that was another game that went to overtime, 17 carries for 78 yards and 5 catches. So every time Larry was held in check on the ground, he did contribute in a large way in the receiving game. And then, of course, caught absolute fire. The one game that he was held in check and he got hurt, early on in the game, I think it was a stinger on the shoulder, is when he ran Mike Doss over. And Mike Doss said to me out in the parking lot, I randomly ran into him. I randomly ran into Mike Doss out in Ohio State's parking lot the one time talking to him. And he said, I remember that. And he said, that was one of the hardest hits I've ever taken down in the corner after Penn State's opening drive.
I can't believe Mike Doss is not on the podcast. You still have his phone number. I bet you do.
Plenty of time.
I've somehow lost that, but it was he was smoking a cigar, having a good time. It was an awesome conversation. Yeah.
Well, one thing about that Iowa game, that's the game where Joe chased the refs off the field, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, fairly early in that game, they threw either a pitch out or a swing pass to Larry Johnson, and he got hit and he fumbled, and Iowa picked it up and ran it in for a touchdown, and they said it wasn't a fumble, which was by far the worst call in that game, and it cost Iowa 7 points. So, people may remember that game a little bit differently than I remember, but that has nothing to do with Larry Johnson. I mean, Larry Johnson was phenomenal, but Saquon Barkley was the best player that I've ever covered. He was the best player in college football, and he might be the best football player in the world right now. Mm-hmm. I just think he's in a different category.
It's an interesting point you bring up Larry's injury, because I'm still convinced that Saquon was partially injured the second half of 2017 after the Iowa game, because to me, they never, ever gave him the workload anywhere close than he had in that game. He never really, the lateral things, the moving of laterally that he did in that game, I never saw it to me the rest of the year. And by the time they played at Maryland in the season ender, it was almost like he was running. It looked like he was running in cement. And I just don't think that was him. I think that was partially physical. But when he was playing behind a really not good offensive line for 2 years.
Yeah, that's
no
the thing.
question.
Never had a good offense.
Terrible offensive line, no matter what James says. He did so much of it himself. And I guess maybe you're right. Maybe Larry's substance should weigh heavier in that. I mean, just the way Saquon did his things probably kind of sticks with people more, right?
It probably does. And that's why I tend to gravitate more towards, I don't want to say old timers, but I'm going to say like guys from a previous era. And that's one of my biases, that I do give guys from previous era a little bit more credibility, because it's tough to make that adjustment. Like, I would love to see Saquon Barkley and Nick Singleton with Sam Gash in front of them, or a high single eye like Larry Johnson running a paterno counter. I think it'd be fun to watch.
Well, you have to factor that kind of stuff in, and it's sort of impossible to do. Yeah. And when we do quarterbacks, which I assume we're going to do one of these weeks. I mean, you're going to be some crazy examples of that when we get into that.
Just Larry Johnson running through a hole that all wasn't that big, much like Saquon Barkley, and he could beat you in 3 different ways without actually doing anything that was so physically amazing, leaping over anybody. It was, he lowered his shoulder. Sometimes Larry ran a little bit high, and would just shut guys with his legs. And then had probably the best stiff arm in the NFL when he was in the NFL for a good amount of time.
Yeah, also a good throw. That's true.
I also think like 400 carries, I think he had the 1 year in the NFL. Was it 400? I'd have to double check that number, but an obscene amount of carries with the Chiefs when Herm Edwards was the head coach, and he was just never the same after that. Talking about load management, when it comes to the NBA. But all right, that was a fun debate, Big Ten era. I like that. No shots at me for putting Tony Hunt number 5.
Tony Hunt was very good. But no, not compared to these 5. No.
I mean, do you put Evan Royster there, Tony Hunt there? I mean, you could name a bunch of guys that don't really excite me all that much, but were extremely productive in their own rights.
I went between him and Eric McCoo, is what I went.
Really? Eric McCoo? Eric McCoo?
AK is coming up with a controversial.
You guys didn't like number 8?
What, you got Terrell Golden in your list now, too?
Penn State's had a lot of good running backs, man. They've really had a tremendous number.
I mean, I know he played during the bad times, but I mean, I don't think that was on the running back's fault. I thought that was actually a pretty steady production.
So I'm taking, if I have a choice at Penn State, and you're going to give me Miles Sanders or Eric McCoo, I'm taking Miles Sanders all day.
That's a name we probably should have mentioned before now. I mean, there's a guy that went to the Pro Bowl, and he would have had better career numbers if he had not come along a little bit in the Barkley era.
I laid out my biases. Of giving more cred to guys from a previous era. I said that open.
But you got to have sense too,
Well, I get that. Well, probably at the end of the year, that was a good. I got burned bad on that one. That being said, at the end of this year, I probably would put Nick Singleton, depending on how this year goes, at number 5. I would have him leap a bunch of people. Right now, I have Miles Sanders in front of Nick.
If he stays healthy, he is going to be the Penn State leader in total offense at the end of this year. Of course, Royster is the leading career rusher, right?
It would be Silas Redd before he, as the fans would say, affectionately turned Judas and left before 2012.
I don't. If you could ask Joe Paterno, I don't think Joe Paterno would say Evan Royster is the best running back coach. In fact, I know he wouldn't, because he did mention about 100,000 times that he was the best lacrosse player in the state of Virginia.
The vision.
Other than that, he didn't seem to be in love with Evan.
All right, just for fun's sake, 5 minutes here, just for funsies. All-time Penn State running backs, and I'll go first on my list. Let me pull it up. Lenny Moore, guy played both ways, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Lenny Moore. Lenny Moore is number 1. Larry Johnson, Kurt Warner, Saquon Barkley, Lydell Mitchell is my top 5 of all time.
Wow.
If Lydell Mitchell is good enough to keep Franco Harris playing a different position and keep him from toting a rock, an NFL Hall of Famer, the guy must have been pretty good in college football.
Yeah, Lydell Mitchell was really good and was a pretty good pro when he was healthy. I would put nice. I would put Lenny Moore after. Again, I think Saquon is the gold standard. I would put Lenny Moore second. I don't know that, and then maybe Johnson third. We haven't mentioned John Capoletti, who won the Heisman, but I really don't know that he was quite at the level athletically of these guys. And how far down the list do we have to go before Andrew cannot produce a piece of memorabilia about the person?
I do have a ball signed by a bunch of these guys from when I was a kid over in the other closet.
You have Eric McCoo's wrist views.
And also, I would probably have Kurt Warner in the top 5 also.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting because, of course, the older guys I've only read about and talked to people about. I've never seen them play. And I just really like to be able to see somebody play in person. And God, Lou Prado, if he was here, could be maybe the best for this, right? Because he's seen them all play. I like Lenny Moore. I mean, I definitely agree with what Joe would say is that he may be the best all-around Penn State player.
He did say that.
Because of his skills, not just at running back, but he could have been an NFL defensive back. And he played both ways. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm going back and forth between what you've heard about Lenny Moore and Kurt Warner at being maybe being number 1 over the more recent guys. Lydell Mitchell, interestingly enough, and Lenny Moore are very similar in how they starred because they both ended up being great pass catchers in the NFL for the same team, actually. And they didn't do that maybe as much at Penn State, but they had those athletic skills. And I think that's how Lydell was able to keep Franco in the background a bit, right? Because he was such a great athlete. So, man, I don't know where Saquon fits there, right? Because does the old guys get number 1? Mike, do you go with?
Well, the only one
Saquon.
not who I don't remember seeing play
Yeah.
Lenny Moore. And Lenny Moore was a great player, but I mean, Saquon is an incredible football player. Saquon is the kind of guy that other guys in the NFL are blown away by.
Yeah, and when you get to see somebody like that in person, you catch things that you can't know about Kurt Warner. So Saquon 2015 against Michigan, he gets caught from behind on a long run. He never gets caught from behind, I don't think, ever again in 2 more years at Penn State. You could see, like, here's a very talented guy that knew something could be better. He could be better. He got better, and he was the best at that. Like, so it's like when you see people not just do what he did, but how they transform themselves while they're at Penn State, even, that just makes me, respect them even more. Larry Johnson, I'll just add that he also did run against a couple of the worst giving up defenses in the history of college football, meaning Michigan State and Indiana. So, though he did have to run at Indiana, he did have to run across the middle of that field was sand. I don't know if anybody remembers. That was painted green because their field was so bad. So he was running across a beach going for almost 300 yards.
Yeah. How do you factor
Andrew probably has that in his
It was 327, and I have that here. I'm cheating. I have that here.
Were you at the game, Andrew?
I was not. But Kurt Warner was in a hunting cabin and phoned into the broadcast. If you guys remember.
I don't remember that.
No. He phoned into a
broadcast. Over with information here, big guy.
Like, it was incredible.
He phoned in?
He phoned in. He was on the phone during the broadcast talking about Larry beating his rushing record, breaking his rushing record, excuse me. And it's so funny, like, how players get remembered. And this is something I think we've lost in the transfer portal. Like, when I think of Curtis Enis, I think of two runs. One against Ohio State in 97, and then him crying in the post game. I also think of Aaron Harris, who, if he doesn't blow his knee out, I'm maybe putting that number 5. Yeah. Number 25, Aaron Harris was.
Who knows? But he might have.
So I remember Curtis Enis there and in the kickoff classic against USC, just trucking USC guy.
I remember that game. Yeah.
And Lynn Swann interviewing him after. Saquon, there's so many runs. The Minnesota game and then the Rose Bowl. And you mentioned the Iowa game. But we kind of like latch on to like certain plays and where these memories are, I think push these guys like up. And it's like whatever play we remember the most and being the most romanticized with drives our rankings.
No, it makes the other piece of that. I'm sorry, Frank. The other piece of that is how many times, because of their brutal offensive lines, how many times did Saquon take the handoff 4 yards deep, and within a second he's got somebody wrapped around him?
No.
How many times did we see that? Because their offensive line, it was almost unbelievable how often that happened to him. And that might be something that,
factors in,
causes him to be underrated. I mean, I'm not saying he's underrated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a great debate. So the last time Penn State was ranked number 1 in the preseason, you know when it was, right? By AP.
I think it was 1997.
Yes.
Sports Illustrated had them in number 1 in 1999.
No, they did not.
Yeah.
In 99?
99. LeVar Arrington on LeVar Arrington.
No. Oh, Sports Illustrated, yeah.
Sports Illustrated. Yeah. LeVar Arrington was on the cover, white background, blue uniform. Yes. Said LeVar Arrington fires up number 1. And then there was a whole spread about Paterno wanted LeVar to be a little more quiet.
Right. Absolutely. You're correct. So in 97, we start off, 9-0. If Aaron Harris does not get hurt, they may win a national title. Okay. That's how you bring Aaron Harris up. I mean, it's unbelievable the impact that he had on Curtis Enis and that team that people forget about. And then he was lost halfway through the year. And the other injury, you talk about players making differences. Sean Lee, did he play in the 2008 season? I don't think he did because he was injured.
He definitely didn't play.
Tom Bradley would still say to this day and joke that you cost him a national title, right? Look how close Penn State was to being undefeated the entire season. Losing on the last play at Iowa, okay, or they're undefeated, and they go to the national title game. They do not play USC, and if Sean Lee is on that team, I think that happens. So,
in 1997, Sports Illustrated preview article, it talked about a new quarterback for Penn State that year, and that it was Mike McQueary, and it said, "Can Mike McQueary handle the pressure being in the hot seat?"
Wow.
Flash forward a little bit. No, he can't.
You're right, because he was on the SI cover as well as LeVar, right, 2 years later. Is that right? Was McQueary on the SI cover in 97?
No.
Who was? Shafi Field?
The LeVar cover was an action photo, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, LeVar, he was holding something
It was
and it was posed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Wow.
So who was on the cover in 97, Andrew? And it wasn't Reggie Jackson. He was with the...
It was Joe Juravicius, taken from the game against USC.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
Boy, I'm going to go through a lot of guesses before I come up with
You know which game that was the photo was taken from?
The 96 kickoff.
These guys are going down memory lane here.
Was it the 96 kickoff classic at the Meadowlands?
I have no idea.
I think it was. Because
it's a good call on that.
It was a preseason magazine, so I mean that's what it should be.
Yeah, so it's different, right? Sports Illustrated had Penn State #1 in 99. Associated Press, I think, had him 3, and the coaches poll had him 4. So, I mean, it's going to be similar probably to this year type of situation.
Yeah.
So, great discussion. This is what's fun about the off season. Maybe we'll come up. Maybe it'll be linebackers next week. Maybe we'll flop it over, or maybe we'll go to the talent-rich history of cornerbacks at Penn State, and maybe Lenny Moore makes that as well.
Ooh, I love cornerbacks. Best cornerback room in the country this year. Remember?
There we go. It's right up your alley. So just give Rich Gardner and our boy Alan Zamitis AZ a shout out for the best corners of all time at Penn State. Little preview edition. Well, hopefully you guys had fun. Don't kill me too much over the Tony Hunt and Eric McHugh comments that I made. I'm just, romanticizing about an era that has passed us by. And that was fun. Oh. For Frank and Mike, I'm Andrew. Thanks for listening to the Blue White Tailgate Podcast. We'll see you next time.